So in this video, we're going to cover how to graph square root functions. What that means is graphing something like y equals the square root of x. So we have x actually inside of a square root sign. Now, this is an example of a parent function because it's the most basic square root function you can get. We can make it more fancy by adding extra numbers in there, but we'll get to that after we learn the basic shape of the graph first. So what we should do is plot some points right here and see what happens. When I plug in a 0 for x, the square root of 0 gives us a 0 for y. So the point 0, 0 is on our graph. When I plug in a 1 for x, the square root of 1 is equal to 1. So I can take that point 1, 1. If I plug in a 2, the square root of 2 is not going to be a nice answer. So I could use the point as a decimal, but I'm actually going to skip that. If I plug in a 3, also not a nice answer. The next nice answer I'll have, if I plug in a 4, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So 4, 2 is on my graph right here. And I can keep going. I want to get at least one more nice point. And the next one I would have would be 9, 3. The square root of 9 is equal to 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3. Now, if I were to plug in a negative number for x, say I tried plugging in a negative 1, I would end up getting out an imaginary answer right here, because the square root of negative 1 is going to be 1i. Now, unfortunately, you can't graph imaginary numbers on a standard xy plane right here. So for what our purpose is in the graph, this space over here is kind of like dead space where our graph never ever goes. Because anytime you plug in a negative number for x, you get out an imaginary answer, and that's not going to show up on a standard graph. So our graph actually starts right here. There's nothing. It's all dead space to the left of it. And it looks something like this. So what you have here is essentially half of a parabola. And a parabola is the inverse of like an quadratic and square root functions are inverses of each other. If we were to do a plus or minus on that, that's how we'd get the full parabola right here. But it's like half of a parabola. They grow very slowly, so they should not be very steep. But it shouldn't flatline either. It should still be pointed slightly upwards. But this is the typical shape that you should see when you graph a square root function. I have two quick notes here that are going to make graphing these things very simple for us. First of all, notice that the point 0, 0 is on the parent function. That's what we talked about when we graphed like parabolas and I'll use fn to abbreviate function. Parabolas and absolute value functions, we knew that 0, 0 was kind of where we started our graph. That's still true here. And if we go up 1 over 1, we land on the graph. So our over 1 trick that we worked on earlier in the year with A will still work here. So the over 1 trick will still work. And I'll show you what that means in our examples. So let's graph a few of these now that we have the basic shape down. So, actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me comment one more thing. Let's do our domain and range on this example here. The domain of this graph is the x's that we actually use. So if you look at our x's right here, the x's we use, usually domain's been like a free point. It's always all real numbers. But on this graph, the x's only go from here onwards. So we would say the domain is x is greater than or equal to 0, because the graph never comes over here. The range is going to go from this point and it's going upwards, so we use the positive y's, but the graph never comes down to the bottom part either. So we would say that the range is y is greater than or equal to 0 as well. Alright, so now let's get into our examples. So this is going to use the rules we've been practicing all year long. If we look at this, there is a plus 3 on the inside of my graph. A plus 3 on the inside moves you left 3. So that starting point that was at 0 is now going to go left 3, and a minus 2 moves you down 2. So I go left 3 and down 2. That's my starting points. And A in this problem, the number out front, is a 1 here. So I'm going to go up 1 over 1 to get my second points. And those 2 points are all you need to make your graph. So you make it, you kind of angle it, like we talked about. It's not a straight line. It's like half of a parabola here. It's slightly curved. And that would be our graph. The domain in this graph, the x's go from here to the right. So we're going to say x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Sorry, that's negative 3. Negative 3 right here. And for the range, we would say that y is greater than or equal to negative 2. On our next example here, if we look at this, in terms of what direction the graph moves, a -4 on the inside moves you right 4. And there is no up or down movement right here because we're not adding or subtracting anything. So all I'm going to do is go right 4, put my dot, that's where my graph starts, and my a out front is a 3/2. Remember, when it's not linear, you cannot go up 3/2. So if you went up 3/2, you would lose some credit there because it's not linear. You can't only go this over 1 to make this trick work. So if you remember from earlier this year, what we have to do is turn this into a decimal. 3/2 is 1.5. So what I'm going to do is go up like a box and a half over 1. So I'm right here, I'm going to go up like a box and a half and over 1. It'd be somewhere in this area, and then I can make my graph, and I'm good to go. Domain on this one is x is greater than or equal to 4. And my range right here goes from here up, so it's y is greater than or equal to 0. We're going to go one final graph for this video. And let's try it out. So we look at what direction this moves. And this would be a good chance, actually, to pause the video if you're feeling pretty good. See if you can just get this one yourself. We don't go left or right at all, because there's no number on the inside with x. But we do go up 3. So I start out by going up 3. I'm right there. My a in this one is negative, so I'm going to go down 2 over 1. And remember, it's going to look like half of a parabola. So usually it's this half of the parabola. This time we have that half. So it should kind of go like that. When you draw your parabola half here for your square root function, it looks something like that. And then we're good to go. My domain here is still x is greater than or equal to 0. It's going from this way over. And my range, it's going downwards here. So we're looking at y is less than or equal to 3. All of our square root function graphs have been going to the right here. In order to make them go left, you would see something going on the inside with like a negative x, which we won't really spend too much time worrying about. One final comment, if you saw something like square root and there was a number in front of x, like something like you see right here where there's a 2 here, you cannot listen to the left, right, up, down rules anymore. You would have to make a table and try to graph it that way. So be careful, don't do the rules when there's a number in front of x on the inside.